Welcome to the Green Spa Network November Hangout, Google Hangout, and this month we're following up again with Simon Robinson, the co-author of the book Holonomics, which was one of the main platforms for the content at our GSN Congress about a month and a half ago in Yosemite. So we're following up with Simon. We also have Bonnie Baker on the line. Bonnie is one of Green Spa Network's board members. And she's from Mexico, and there's some neat things going on down there as well. So we're going to have a general conversation today, follow up more from Congress, talk about some of the issues with sustainability, and touch on a few things with Simon's book, Holonomics, as well. So welcome, Simon. Thanks for beaming in from Sao Paulo in Brazil.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. It's great to join you guys this morning, and it is, of course, this afternoon here in Sao Paulo, Brazil.
Excellent. And Bonnie, thank you. I don't even know where you are at the moment.
It's been hard to keep track of me the past few weeks. I'm home in Mexico now. Just to mention, I'm not from here, but this is where I live now for 8 years. So yeah.
Excellent. Well, Bonnie, we were just catching up, and I was fascinated with some of the things you're talking about with regards to what's happened since Congress and some of the thoughts that you've been having around sustainability and leadership. So I wonder if I could just throw it over to you to start out a conversation.
Sure. Yeah, definitely in reflecting about some of the occurrences and some of what's been happening since Congress, I think there were so many things that were spurred in Congress in all of our lives. There's been a lot of activity around the industry and sustainability since Congress, but where I've been finding the reflections, and certainly in the work that I do, that is very much related to body and the spa industry and its very foundations. Some of the concepts and the ideas presented by Simon are really hitting home, and they've made intense impressions on me and the people that I'm working with. And his model of the threefoldness in our bodies and the threefold in life has been something that I've been reflecting on quite a bit. The idea of sustainability now in life as kind of a place where there's a dichotomy between the ego and what we need and possess and what our needs for are in life, and where we find a balance with altruism and how we can let go and share and be more part of a community. So there's this kind of needing something and keeping it on an ego level, and sharing and being part of something that's growing in a different way. And I reflect on that in the body as well, whereas we have an innate design that needs egocentrism. We have an innate place of needing to protect, and our immune system and our metabolism breaks down and fights off invaders and keeps us safe, and it's very egocentric, and it's a place that we need to have that energy of real defense and real inner focus. But in our emotional system, and in the other pole that also Simon presented in our nerve sense, in our emotional sense system, there needs to be altruism. There needs to be a sense of being able to be part of a larger community and not feeling that need to hold in. We actually need, in order to create health, a way of looking out and a way of sharing and a way of connecting. So this polarity and this balance between where we find ego and where we find the ability to connect and share, I think that has relevance in sustainability. And I have found that in the work that I do in the spa environment, in the different business environments, that's become even more of an issue. And being able to connect to something on a wider scale as in business, to see this holistic approach, which is exactly where Simon's Holonomics comes in. So that's been a big reflection for me. And I think also in the environment and our relationships, being able to go to understand where that dualism comes in. Maybe Simon wants to allude on that a little more too.
Yeah, it's interesting that you're using the word dualism, because as we've seen as you make the point with the human body, we can't operate without ego. And I've been one of the conversations I've been having recently is a lot of people, or maybe quite a few people, use the word ego only in a negative manner. And in fact, it's not. You know, we do actually, we couldn't operate without ego. And the other thing that I've been noticing is that quite a few people have very different definitions of ego. And this is something that's really interesting to explore. Now, the thing about holonomics is that it takes us into non-dualistic experiences of reality. Now, this is like I know this is a really deep part of holonomics, but what does this mean in practice? When we are maybe stuck in ego, and maybe when we don't really have this balanced approach to how we are, our being in the world, when we're stuck in ego, we experience a life that's fragmented. We kind of experience things as separation, as different to us. And often when we're stuck in ego, we make distinctions. Oh, this is me, this is not me. I talk a lot about, networks with ego. Sometimes we don't really have authentic networks, we have cliques. So in a clique, we really try and emphasize the differences between us, those of us in the clique, and those not in a clique. But one of the deeper parts of holonomics that I didn't really go into during the conference, but it's there for readers to read, is the fact that when we make a distinction, at the very same time, we're also relating to the other. But when we're stuck in ego, we miss the relation. We only kind of seem to focus and notice the distinction and the separation.
Right.
So this is why we kind of need to go back upstream into what I call the coming into being of, our experiences, to realize that no, we don't actually experience life as separate. We always have just a single experience of distinguishing and relating at the same moment. Now, I don't mean to sound too philosophical, but really when we develop our mindfulness, when we become more aware of this thing we call experience, we become much more open to other people as we realize that no, in fact, we're not just making a distinction of separation, we're also at the same time understanding our relationship to other people. And this is why, I can't remember if I said this in my presentation, but Maria and I, we have this definition of sustainability. Sustainability is in the quality of our relationships. And this is a very experiential way of thinking about sustainability, which comes back to what you were saying. So I think this is one area where, it's great that in the Congress we really started to explore leadership at quite a deep level. Larry introduced some of this. We did the holonomics workshop on holonomic thinking and leadership. So I'd love people watching this to think, hang on a minute, when I'm making a distinction, am I actually at the same time relating to someone else? And this can help us, develop a much more harmonious relationship with other people, nature, the environment, other things happening in our organization as well.
Well, it's so interesting, and I just picked up on what you're saying there, because I find that, your approach and the way you've written the book and the way you present it is so refreshing, and it's such a new, very much manageable from a scientific way of looking at it. But for me as an anthropologist, it always goes back to, what do the traditional cultures do? How can I relate that to the cultural perspectives? And so often what you find in very traditional, very indigenous cultures is that same approach. So if we even look at just, a traditional Chinese approach to life with the yin and yang, you do have this dualism, but where the focus is where they meet in the middle. The focus is always how to bring it back together into the encounter. So where do these two sides balance? And that's what you're saying, the relationship between, there is a distinction, I have this separateness, I have this individual existence here, but it's that encounter of where I meet with the other and how the other is reflected in me and how I am reflected in the entire environment, supporting and challenging me. I think that's where it's all about, and that's the wisdom that we bring in with these indigenous and traditional cultures, but we have to present it in an entirely new way. And going back to since Congress, I've been working on projects that are constantly asking me to bring in the local influences, the traditional influences in the different areas that I work, and I'm always so inspired by the fact that these traditional influences, these ancient healers, these wise elders, the relationship that they had with the environment, the relationship they had with healing, with herbs, with the elements, the fire, the air, was a relationship of understanding their position in the world, their position in time and space. And they were just there living it experientially. There was no necessarily thinking about it. And we're at the point now in time where we're actually having to cognizantly think and understand, where am I in all of this? How do I relate to this individual body, and how do I relate to that other larger body, which is the whole holonomic perspective? No? So I find that there's so much wisdom that we can go back with, but we can't say that's the way to do it. We have to bring it into a context of modern evolution, and where humans are right now with our logical, rational, absolute necessity of understanding it in a scientific and tangible aspect. But we're saying the same thing. We're really saying the same thing in your approach to, addressing the elements and addressing this, this consciousness about life, and being able to be conscious about, how am I using these materials, or how am I relating to my work even? Where is my consciousness flowing during the day? And I think there's a lot of message there. There's a lot of answers to our questions just in that space. And being able to find the relationship between me individually and me as part of the whole, and directing actions from that, and we're still searching for that. No, we're still searching for that, and I think that's where our challenges come in, because letting go, we're kind of holding on to something from before, and we're reaching for something new, and we don't want to let go, but we can't reach that far. So there's a bit of a gap there, where we're trying to let go and still reach.
Yeah, I mean, it's wonderful. I myself am a big student of indigenous thinking, indigenous culture. And the key thing for me about indigenous thinking is that the planet, Gaia, the ecosystem, it's alive. And they have this wonderful sense of the livingness of life. And so if you think back to my keynote, I was talking about the fact that especially the scientific method, biologists in the 18th century, 19th century, science began to have this obsession with classification. And when you start to classify categories of plants and animals, it takes you one step removed from the livingness of life, if all you really focus on is this categorization. And then as the scientific methodology developed, we went from classification to mathematical modeling of nature. And again, we sometimes confuse the mathematical model with nature itself. And what happens when we have this very scientific worldview, nature is dead to us, because we've lost that element of the livingness of life. And so I used the example of the water lily that we also have in the book Holonomics to say, how can we use Goethe's approach to science and really reconnect with the living processes in nature? Because nature is not dead. Nature is not a set of categories or classification systems. Nature is alive. And then once we start to do this more intuitive, once we take a more intuitive approach to science, which starts with the sensory experience, looking at colors, looking at the living processes in plants, these living processes, we kind of almost experience them as living inside of us, because we take it into our intuitive selves. And this is another way in which we break down this kind of dualism that has entered into the modern scientific paradigm. And we almost end up with a much more kind of indigenous way of experiencing the world without really knowing it. We don't have to call it indigenous, but for me, I always ask, why are we destructive to the environment? Why do we behave unethically towards other people and not treat other people as we would hope they would treat ourselves? And it's because we're one step removed. We don't have this empathy anymore. And I think we've really lost this in many scientific methodologies. So in holonomics, we don't really talk about indigenous wisdom and thinking. We don't talk about the ancient Eastern philosophies as well. And the reason is that we really just focus on this dynamic conception of wholeness that we find going right back to the start of modern humanity. And again, one of the key insights is it's not this dynamic conception of wholeness. It's not one way of thinking. The way I explain it is, don't get confused between the contents and the container. Mm-hmm. So all the way through, if we look through the history of humanity, we've always had this relationship, this kind of play between understanding the relationship between the parts and the whole and any system. But we've used this way of thinking, this level of consciousness, and applied it in many different ways. Starting, if I start with Plato, Plato is interested in issues such as the good, the beautiful, the true, and how do these concepts relate to each other. Goethe was interested in finding out about the living processes in nature, and this science did actually inspire the younger Charles Darwin. And if you look at my blog, what I've been writing about more recently, it's hermeneutics. So it's how do we understand language? How can we really use dialogue and communication to really better understand each other and really improve communication in organizations? These are all very different contexts. So these are all very, very different contents. But we need to contain the contents within a container, which is having this dynamic understanding of the relationship between the parts and the whole. And this is the central insight of holonomics. And once you've had that insight, then you do see it in indigenous thinking. You do see it in the Vedas of India and ancient scripture in India. And you do see it in modern thinking as well, but it can get lost when you focus just on what people are trying to talk about, as opposed to this expansion of consciousness, which really helps us to understand the bigger picture.
Mm-hmm. Well, you also mentioned that in the work that we did at the Congress, and you were going through, how we see, what is your seeing? And so in terms of, the Goetheanistic methodology, he also starts out, you can't go through the 4 steps of his methodology of seeing nature without going through this first seeing things differently. So stepping into a stage of awe, in science, in so many of the major breakthroughs in science is because the scientist has come from a stage of just awe about the experiment, or awe of what's happening in front of them, and that place of awe opens up your consciousness, your ability to perceive, and it's like a childlike stage of just being completely aware and in awe of the world around you. And I think that sometimes in this compartmentalization and in breaking things down, like you said, we lose that sense of awe. It becomes dead to us, And so from awe, we go into a stage of non-judgment and just being, open to receiving without having any filter there. So you're not perceiving the world through my own filter of the world. You're just perceiving it in a state of complete openness and awareness, and it creates a new way of seeing, And then with that openness, being able to take in something new about something that is so everyday, but you see it in such a different way. That was also a very important message for me in the book, and that's what enables, I think, this ability to relate to nature the way that Goethe was talking about. You observe first without any judgment, no names, no categorizations or anything. You just observe and you just see what's right there in front of me in the tangible world. But then to start to perceive what's happening underneath that, to perceive what the movement is, what the subtle influence is, what the energetic influence is, what's causing these changes, then you discover something new that can lead you to a new perception, no? And so I think that, when you talk about us being able to perceive ourselves as a part of, or the part and the whole, it has to do with being able to relate from an inner place with that other, whether it's a plant, whether it's a person, whether it's my patient or my coworker. You almost disappear in my filter of the world, and I'm able to perceive from another perspective, the outer perspective, or being more closely connected with that other participant in the experience. No, I think that's at least my understanding.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And also, I've actually gone through, as part of my master's degree, I really participated in being taught Goethean science. And there's a couple of really things that I did that really made a huge impression. The first one is, if we just talk about perception, one of the early exercises is that I just had a twig, a small stick in front of me. I was asked to look at it, and then I was, and then you really have to kind of really, really look at it, and then it's taken away, and then you draw as much of it as possible. So it's a very, very simple exercise. This is a very early, simple exercise, and that really teaches you how much of the detail in nature you miss. Because if you just look at a gnarly twig, just something very small, it's got knots, it's got twirls, it's got all these patterns and textures. And as I said, normally when we're not fully mindful, when we walk past a tree, we just experience the category tree. Yeah, we don't normally walk past a tree and think, oh, that's a living being, full of these dynamic processes. It's not a static thing. No, we walk past, we're lost in our thoughts. I'm thinking, I've got to make a telephone call this afternoon, I've got to write the report. Category tree. This simple exercise of just being told, right, there's a twig, look at it, and then you draw it, and then you compare your drawing to the actual twig, and you think, oh, wow, there was that bit there. I didn't remember it. So this is interesting. So that's a classroom exercise. Then, of course, you actually, Goethean science is all about being with the living plants, and not just a plant on its own, a plant in its context, i.e. a plant in its natural environment. And so one thing we did is we went into the gardens of the Dartington estate, just down near Totnes, and we were told to go explore these gardens and find a plant. And we would be with this plant for a whole week. So there was so in the morning our lessons were in the classroom. In the afternoon we'd go out into this great estate. And the first thing we do, in order to shake off your preconceptions, you find a plant. So I found a holly bush, and you just sit there and you attempt to get to know the plant. So again, if we think of like a traditional scientific experiment, you just jump straight in, and it's all about observation and measurement. But here, this was kind of almost stage 0 rather than stage 1. It's like, okay, just ask the plant questions, who are you? And just be open to whatever thoughts and intuitions arise. And that was like a whole afternoon of preparation before then going into the first major stage, which is to do, draw the plant as closely as you can. The idea isn't to be as artistic as possible, because I can't draw at all, but just to draw, notice all these details. So yeah, absolutely. It's not that often that we go into nature and just try to be without doing, and just try and let nature speak to us. 'Cause I think Ilya Prigogine said, nature speaks with 1,000 voices, and we've only just started to listen. That's what we have the quote in our book. I wanted to put it there because it's absolutely wonderful. And this, to me, is mindfulness. Mindfulness for me is not just meditation and switching off. It's the mindfulness, to me, is the experience of an expansion of consciousness. And this has everything to do with creativity, everything to do with ethics, being open to others, leadership, developing ourselves, developing our businesses. So absolutely, this first stage of just allowing nature to be, and to be in nature without these preconceptions, it's not easy.
No.
But when you're kind of guided into it, it's quite remarkable.
And finding that still voice inside, or allowing your voice to be still so that you can hear those thousands of voices in nature, is something that is crucial in all of this. And I think it's a place where we as human beings we're both, more and more removed and more searching for it, because we realize that, that constant hum of attention and activity and, emails and all the things that are driving us every day to a constant, noise. We're almost going now, with the pendulum swing, is going back to the other side, where we're just, in such need of finding those quiet spaces and those quiet moments, and that's where, the mysteries reveal themselves, actually, in that space of mindfulness. And so I think that, the Goetheanistic activities are so important, and we're, from those inspirations that you've had in the classroom or in your studies, and in the work that we do often in agriculture and the biodynamics, very much along the same lines, if you sit with someone, not a plant, but with someone with those same principles, and you allow that voice to be still, and you allow that awe of what's in front of you to come in, and we're actually finding that there's usefulness in that in diagnostic techniques, working with guests or clients in the spa industry, even in certain medical environments. Just really, the observation and the intuitive skill to help to bring forth what's going on in that person, or even in that environment. So in a business environment, relationship skills, how do you quiet that voice, observe what's out there, not draw it this time, but just observe, and then perceive something that organically wants to come through. It's a valuable lesson, it's a valuable skill, and I think it's something that we could even put into exercises in Congress, or put into exercises in different areas that will help us to hone in on those qualities and hone in on those skills, and then bring them back to our environments. I would like to do that in any case. Not that I'm very good at drawing either. But
yeah, I think this would be a hugely valuable exercise, because again, we started this conversation talking about ego.
Yeah.
And then we've moved into observation. And I think one of the great failings of people who are in leadership positions but who don't actually manage to become great leaders is their inability to see another person in terms of who that person truly is, instead of seeing that person through your own kind of limited filters and seeing them in your terms, like, oh, that person is a threat. I actually see this a lot in the sustainability industry, and I think it's a really big problem that's really preventing the sustainability industry really coming together as a network, as a true, as a true network of people collaborating. I think there's still a lot of threat. There's still a lot of competition, and sometimes, in sustainability, our solutions can only now come through deep collaborative work. And this is the thing: it's one thing to be open to a plant and really see the plant in that, it's a very difficult stage then to apply the same kind of methodology and way of thinking and apply that to other people, because
Yeah.
it's for other people our ego often will only sense threats rather than really seeing the essence of the other person. And I think this is what makes a great leader. Great leaders have this great empathy, and they're really able to see the contributions someone can make, the skills that someone can have, and also they can see someone in terms of who that person can become,
Right.
as well as just who that person is at this very moment in time. And this is all down to the dynamic way of seeing and the filters that we have.
Absolutely. That's so.
I can see that being a really valuable exercise, and I think people at the Congress would be very open to that.
Mm-hmm. And in the places that we do Congress, I mean, it's just, you want to naturally go out and observe nature for a while. So I can see that being something really fun for next time. I agree with you so much in terms of how we almost prevent ourselves from getting ahead in sustainability, but also in general in businesses or in the work that we do, healing environments, where we're not able to distinguish between that place, the right place for ego, and the wrong place for ego. And as I said, there is a place for ego for us to maintain in our in our building up of our physical body and the breakdown of substances and the fighting off disease. But when that ego goes into the emotional body and begins to fight off, competition, or we get into that space, then it creates not only disease in our relationships, but it creates disease situations in our body. And we find that that's what causes stress and poor sleeping and poor digestion and all these different places. So doing some work around that also is I think very important, to be able to understand, when is my ego coming out of the place it needs to be, and when can how can I put it back there a little bit, and being able to be generous with our time and generous with our knowledge and generous with our even our materials that we have, because there's so much focus now on intellectual property rights and on whose brand image is there and all these different things, and I think that's getting us really off track. And in a sustainability environment, there's no real need for that if our bottom line and our core mission is to be unified in that. So when you look at the big picture, it's very harder to focus on the small picture and on the ego picture. I know Paul has a lot of things to add to that.
Are you watching the thoughts go through?
I do.
Yeah, no, it's a fascinating conversation, and I'm stimulated by lots of different lines of thinking, and so I'll talk about that for a quick second. And that is my own personal confirmation and my desire and almost the I don't know, it's just got this attraction to it to address things at an intellectual level. So we're having an intellectual conversation about ego and about sustainability and about holonomics and all this stuff. And this is one of the things that I've brought away from Congress and the conversations around holonomics for me. It's very subtle, and Simon, or Bonnie, I'll take your coaching on this. But I find I have to recognize, and I'm developing this muscle in myself. Okay, this is the intellectual Paul looking at things, and there's other aspects to it. So I'm gonna short circuit at the moment, but bringing it into spas. What the conversation is reminding me of a lot is what I'll call the healer conversation, or the role of the healer. And I go back to some of the important insights that I had in my training as a healer, which was how I entered the spa industry in my professional life, and around ego in particular and stuff. And I'm sure this is familiar to many people, but one of the lessons that I had, that sort of hit me over the head at the time was in a group setting, our leader was being asked, how do I make my ego go away? I want to be a healer and my ego's getting in the way. How do I make it disappear? And the response was, again, it hit me over the head and some other people as well. The response was, well, why would you want to make your ego small? Why would you want to get rid of it? Make it bigger. And that flew in the face of what was then my idea about ego as me, and it was very Freudian. And then and that helped me break down that what you referred to earlier, Simon, as an automatically negative response to that word, and how it's got that kind of connotation in at least our culture here in America. And the whole idea was, well, if you make your ego big enough to cover everybody, which is kind of an audacious sort of thought, because that requires you to think, well, it's me. How could it be everybody? That'd be like me acting like, God or something or whatever else, and there's something wrong with that, But it's true. If you can expand your mind to include everybody, then the oneness is there, and all of a sudden you start to see the perception and the other things. So there's a lot to be talked about maybe around the role of a healer and how that's playing out in our spa culture and in our staffs of therapists, who are dealing with that with their own journey in those regards, and at the same time trying to work in a business setting and then make that kind of contribution to other people as well. One question, let me throw this at you, Bonnie, is very specifically since Congress around this ego conversation for you. What's different? Has something changed in the way that you relate? Like, pick one thing, maybe that's changed in the way you relate to somebody important in your business or your life. I don't know. I'm putting words in your mouth at this point. But what's changed? Show me something, or talk about something that's changed about your relationship with your ego.
Wow.
Right?
You get personal on this, don't you?
I don't know. You don't have to answer that. That's fine. But
well, it's brought a lot more awareness for me about where I am in that reduced consciousness, ego phase, protective phase, and where I can be in that expanded consciousness, like you said, in the phase of you are all my ego. Right. And trying to continually check myself against, this person is challenging me, they're really presenting a problem, blah, blah, blah. How can I go into that Goetheanistic way of seeing them and observe, where are my limitations, where are my fears about this, and how can I become, in their perspective or what their experience is. And that's a big challenge. It's hard to do on a daily basis. I mean, when we're in a retreat or where we're in a congress and that's, you've been given 2 hours to go out and observe that, it's a whole different experience than when you're, there in a business meeting or in front of the therapist and there's a challenge. And so I found that I'm much more aware, and it's much more visceral for me, this getting into that mindset, and then, lowering my need to separate, defend, be, in a mentality of, wait a minute, that's mine, and that's disappearing. And so little by little, with that awareness, I feel that there is a lot more of a consciousness towards how can we create something that's more on a much more community level. No? So those are just very personal reflections because it's coming up for me a lot more. I think that, they always say with more awareness comes more responsibility, with more, more responsibility. I don't know what the saying is, but it's something about power and things. And I find that is becoming very true for me. I've taken on responsibilities in life. I've become a board member of GSN. I've taken on a business and relationships that require me to be very true to what those principles are. And so I'm challenging myself constantly to say, okay, was that in line with my principles? Was that in line with the ethics? Was that in line with what I, would like to see happening around me? And it's a challenge. And so, having to be more and more transparent in my role in all of this, and not just have it as lip service. So that's one way of answering your question, I think.
That's amazing, Bonnie. What I'm hearing, and Simon, tell me if you think so. What I'm hearing is mindfulness.
Yeah, a lot.
But even more than that, maybe a little bit of almost a qualified or measured working sense of mindfulness? Because you're beginning to think about what you describe going on is you thinking about what your values are and referencing choices that you're making to what's right and wrong, which is sort of a whole separate conversation. But it's a mindfulness. It's I don't know, Simon. What's the word? Educated mindfulness? You don't say that, right? I mean, what is it?
Well, I feel like, before Simon answers, I feel that it's definitely a daily call to action, and we talked about that a little bit more. You guys talked about it on the last Hangout session, but this call to action, when you've taken on, the mission of sustainability or of wellness or whatever it is, it's got to be active, not passive.
Right.
Right. Simon, sorry.
Yeah. No. Yeah. So it's interesting to answer your question, Paul. It's a little bit different, not difficult. It's different for me because I'm not in the spa industry. So I wanted to bring together some of what Bonnie was saying and also some of what you were saying before with your background as a healer. So, we've talked about, the dynamic way of seeing our relationship with nature, our relationship with other people. But there's another aspect of the dynamic way of seeing, which is how do we see a spa? And this is where the opportunities are for developing spas, developing the spa industry, and really rethinking what a spa is. And I wanted to tell you a little story, just a brief story. After the Congress finished, I had dinner that evening in Berkeley with some friends. And it was really interesting because I was with one friend, and he's in the IT industry. He's a coder. He develops platforms. But one of his ideas, and I don't want to give away too much about his ideas, it's private for now. But he wanted to take some of his peer group, and rather than the traditional, even rather than a creative. I don't know what you'd call it, a creative facility, creative meeting room or business area in Berkeley or San Francisco. His idea was to take his group to a spa. And it was interesting that, I talked a lot about, what we've been talking about at Congress. And here, we've been talking about, how a spa is a very sensory experience. We talked in the Congress about, what my term customer experiences with soul. One of the things we are doing, we're almost getting a little bit too lost in technology. So whereas maybe traditionally some people think of a spa as a place of either healing or relaxation, I'm convinced that we can add to that and see spas of places of intense inspiration and creativity. So it's healing, it's relaxation and creativity. And of course, I do fully know that there are some spas that are already part of hotels. They do have conference facilities, of course. But how can we really rethink this and take the message out to a wider audience rather than just relying on some creative people thinking, why don't we have our meeting in a spa? How could we, as a network and an industry, be more proactive and really help people really expand their thinking about what a spa is? It is about getting closer to nature. It is about having these sensory experiences. It is about opening our hearts and being more empathic. And it is about entering into a more intuitive way of knowing as well. And so there's great opportunities if we really expand our thinking about what the definition of sustainability is. How can we help people become more eco-literate and take this way of thinking and this way of being in the world back into their, maybe more corporate or business lives? I think there are huge opportunities here. And, of course, some of the work that we do, that Maria and I do in our consultancy, we do help people go through these profound learning journeys. We help facilitate profound change, and also, innovation and creativity is very much a part of that. And I think this is one of my takeaways from the Congress, just how much opportunity there is to really rethink spas. It's a very exciting feeling to have, especially because at the Congress you've got the whole ecosystem. And we need to remember, of course, you've got the suppliers as well with all those products. There's a whole ecosystem there where there's so much opportunity.
It's so exciting. I mean, this is where you and I connected.
Yeah.
You know, over a year ago, Simon, when we met, you know, was around an expanded or maybe future. That's my word. You know, version of the word spa, or the definition or the distinction spa, and I can so get on board with that. But let me dig up one of the challenges to that, and it goes back to another sort of encapsulated lesson I got probably along the way in my training, which was that healing doesn't require consent. And so at a very high level, you know, that would mean that whole intellectual thing I was talking about earlier, and a person's intellectual experience of their condition, if you will, you know, however they're thinking and whatever they feel or whatever they believe about energy or healing or whatever, doesn't matter. The exchange can still happen and the process can still happen. So that, you know, if you go with that for a second, it means that to a degree, spas are a place where people find something they don't know they're looking for. You know, they come and they find something that is in that realm of you don't know what you don't know. You know, and so that becomes a supreme challenge in the marketing realm and all other kinds of things when you're trying to relate to a potential spa customer. You know, what are you going to get out of this experience? And when you look at them and say, you know, something you have absolutely no idea that you're going to get, and it's going to be amazing because, you know, and it's for you. I mean, that's kind of a wacky conversation, right? So, in the daily world, at least. So that's another challenge I have, is how do we present spas as a place that is inviting for people, and then does create, you know, the goal that we have to create a safe environment where people can have, the way I say it is that where people can have those kinds of deep personal insights, those thoughts in the world that they can't go back from, you know, that change their world, and in a safe way, and then exit the spa, you know. So how, you know, it's easy for us to talk about it, but then all of a sudden, you know, and this is a trap GSN got into over the years as well. Then we're preaching to the converted, you know, and how do we reach the people who aren't there? And you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I mean, one of the immediate things that comes to my mind is the Apple. Now, I cannot for the life of me remember what year this was. It was quite a few years ago. A big Apple marketing campaign where they pretty much didn't mention products. They didn't mention, oh, we sell computers and it's got these features, blah, blah, blah. The whole essence of the Apple marketing campaign was to say, what does Apple do? We unlock your creativity. Yeah. Do you want to make music? We unlock your creativity. Do you want to be a great film director? We unlock your creativity. And I think that was really the essence of what I'm talking about. You know, absolutely, it is a great challenge, and not everyone are great marketeers. But this is the thing for, you know, business leaders and business owners of spas, hotels, resorts. How can they really send out this message? Yeah, and I'm not saying the marketing message is, oh, come to a spa, unlock your creativity. I'm not saying copy Apple, but I'm saying there are examples already of great marketing campaigns which really inspire us, because they really hit home in terms of what we're doing. And this is, as I said, absolutely, it's a great challenge, but it's what a great challenge to have.
Right.
I feel like, to expand a little on what we were both saying, both spa and sustainability are words that have lost connection with their essential meaning. And we're almost at a moment now where we have to come up with something new. Now, in the world of spa, So this word wellness has begun to take on more of a meaning, and I'm not going to say whether that's good or bad, but it has expanded our understanding of what the spa is there for. And I think it has to go even beyond that, because we're still talking about wellness in terms of a very impersonal situation, or a personal state of being. And wellness, as we know, is directly related to sustainability. Wellness cannot be a state of being if it doesn't take into consideration the environment, the community, the planetary wellness. It's a much bigger piece of the puzzle. So this part in relationship to the whole comes in there.
Not
And
a
it's
private
interesting because
experience.
yeah, and it's very interesting to me because I'm going to give a little plug here to the Wellness Summit, but we're preparing this week for the Global Wellness Summit to meet in Mexico City. And when you first think about that, you say, why is there going to be a wellness summit in Mexico City, which is one of the most polluted, overpopulated, cities that you don't necessarily relate to wellness? But one of the beautiful things that's come up in this summit has been the absolute overwhelming existence of creativity, of design, of art, of all of these different ways of experiencing life in a crowded city, in the middle of a metropolis like Mexico City, but that does contribute to wellness, that does contribute to sensory stimulation, to thought-provoking design and innovation. And as part of wellness, that does have a place. And so looking for these little pockets of health and well-being and connection, and how to create that within the context of a place that you don't normally find it. And it's like going back to that dualism. The old gurus, or the meditators would have to go to the caves in the Himalayas and be way away from everything to reach nirvana and to reach the state of illumination. And now we're in a point in time where we have to find the practical tools to do that here in our modern, chaotic, overstimulated lives. How do we find peace? How do we find stability? How do we find wellness? And how do we keep that on a sustainable level personally? How do I keep that also on a sustainable level with my community, my family, my planet? That's the only thing that really we have, to focus on, because otherwise none of the rest of it matters, is kind of where I think about it. But this wellness summit happening in the middle of Mexico City has really placed a new focus on what wellness means, and it's challenging our spa industry to step up. To really step up, or to create more of a separation between what is true spa and wellness and what is more of a superficial aesthetic approach to wellness. And that's fine. Beauty has its place in wellness as well. Beauty as a representation of natural balance is also a very interesting topic, but maybe for next conversation. But I so resonate with what you're saying, Simon, and the opportunity, the brilliant opportunity that we have in the spa industry, and where we're also squandering that opportunity in a lot of ways. And to bring it back, which GSN does, and which is our whole mission of bringing sustainability to spa and bringing wellness to spa and wellness to the planet, and this big circle of wholeness.
Well, we're coming, once again, actually, this is our third Hangout, and this is going to become a monthly feature for those of you watching this, and the topics and talents will change in terms of who's presenting and speaking, but, I hope that those of you listening are having a similar experience as myself, and that there's lots of ideas going on right now. It's opening up a space of creativity and thinking that actually, and I didn't know how we were going to do this, that actually rivals or is in the same vein as the space that Congress put me in. So this works somehow, which is kind of cool. And how do we want to wrap it up? Where do we want to try? And I don't even know if it's a valid effort to put a bow on it here and leave people maybe with a couple of questions, a couple of things to think about in their lives around this topic as they leave viewing this Hangout.
That's bold and that's big.
Yeah.
I think also it would also be great to really collect feedback. So, you know, the Green Spa Network, it's gone through a rapid phase of expansion. I
Yeah.
know you've been getting more members recently. It's always great to get feedback and find out, you know, we're very open to receiving questions, observations as about what people would like to be covered, and maybe invite one or two other members to join the Hangout as
Yeah.
well. Because obviously, you know, the closer we can get to members, the better we're able to help. So, you know, that would be interesting for future Hangouts. You know, who else would you like to invite? Not just, you know, us, but who
Sure.
else is active out there in Green Spa Network? Because it, you know, sustainability, it's all about diversity.
That's fantastic, Simon. Yeah, we'll. I've already just got some ideas about how to make that happen. So yeah, sounds good.
Right.
Bonnie,
And
any closing thoughts?
just thinking, as you said, this intellectual realm. You know, we can philosophize, we can keep it into a nice discussion, we can present new concepts, but I always look for the way that can come into real active, you know, engaged life. So how to challenge ourselves, how to be, you know, turn these great intellectual discussions into a way of being and a way of interacting and a way of relating to each other. So that's my challenge when I come away from that, and maybe we can get some feedback, you know, from our members and from our viewers to contribute to that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you. And yeah, you know, what I've just realized I'm going to take away from this conversation is underscoring, you know, one thing that I've gotten from Congress. You know, it's not a new thought, but it really it got presented to me in a different way at Congress, and the practical version of that in my daily life right now is to continue. Whenever there's conflict, whenever I have a conversation or see somebody or meet a situation where I react, and I notice that I'm reacting, you know, I'm gonna treat that differently. You know, I would normally go straight up into my head and come up with a whole, you know, Paul thinks it's brilliant, you know, theory or construct around what's going on that would make me somehow feel comfortable, you know, dealing with it, you know. So I'm stopping that, recognizing that conversation, and making room for reflection before I respond when possible in those situations. And that, you know, it's hard to talk about specifically, especially with the time we have, but it changes the way my life happens. It provides different opportunities for me that I would never have gotten to if I just focused on what was wrong about that situation and fixing it and moving forward. So that's what I'm going to do out of this. Is it's a great reminder to take a deep breath and approach life a little bit differently, and feel comfortable and safe in doing so. So that's me. So here we are.
No, it's been it doesn't feel like an hour. As always, fantastic conversation. So it's been great to join both of you. Thanks for that.
Thank you, Simon. It's really great to see you again. It's been a busy couple of months, so I really like these Hangouts are keeping us in touch. So that's good.
Absolutely.
And Bonnie,
thank you.
Thanks for being here today. I'm glad the connection worked out. I suppose it's a little too late, but I do want to recognize that Larry Prohaska was scheduled to be on this call today. He obviously wasn't here. He's doing great and looking forward to being on future Hangouts with us. And so if you missed Larry today, I apologize for that. There were circumstances that left him out of the conversation today. So thank you, everybody, for being here. Thanks for making this a great way to start my week, and hopefully yours as well. So cheers.
Thanks,
Take care.
Thanks everybody.
Simon. Bye.